Welcome to the Smart Charge by Ridergy podcast. This is Claudio and Jürgen, founder and CEO of Ridergy. This is your show to learn about all things energy management and smart charging innovation for electric vehicles and fleets. Welcome back to Smart Charge. Today we are with Jürgen Mayerhofer, founder and CEO of Enspired, an optimizer of battery storage. Jürgen's path runs from the early days of gas market liberalization in Austria, think the famous Baumgarten node, capacity booking and real physics, to today's software-driven power markets, where batteries are dispatched in real time. We get practical about intraday trading. Germany alone sees 10 plus million price updates per day, stacking day-ahead intraday and ancillary services, and why the truly hard part is the last mile of automation, connecting the EMS to a trading platform that can forecast, decide, and dispatch quarter hour by quarter hour. There's 96 products per day. Jürgen explains how Enspired connects to batteries via EMS, optimizes at 100 megawatt scale projects, and why batteries can work without subsidies if you respect location, grid impact, and build for full automation rather than manual lever pushing. If you care about turning storage into a profit-making grid supporting resource, this one is your field guide. I'm very proud to have Jürgen as well advising Ridergy, and let's dive in. Hello Jürgen, how are you today?
Hi Claudio. Very well. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, happy to have you, and so glad to learn more about you and Enspired. And so let's start with you first. I know you have quite a long background already in the energy space. What was the inception where you knew that this was the space you wanted to work on? And what were the key, if you had to just spend 1 minute or two about your background, the key steps in your journey so far?
Okay, where do I start? So first of all, I was always very interested in computer sciences. So for me, it was it's clear to work in that space. And I applied for a lot of different jobs without any clear goal, I would say. And by accident, I moved to nowadays you would call it startup, right? Back then it was just a small company with like as employee number 18, and it was 2002 when the natural gas market in Austria was liberalized. So we moved away from fax messages to nominate natural gas imports to fancy Excel spreadsheets via email, meanwhile still known as the very famous KISS formats. And that's how I, by accident, stumbled into the energy market. So actually, my background is natural gas logistics, if you want to call it like this. So my first bigger project was writing the algorithm to optimize physical gas flows, right, with compressor stations and imports and exports. And back then it was a nodal system, right? A lot of discussions going on in the power market about nodal pricing, right? This is how natural gas worked 25 years ago-ish. So, and as soon as I found out that I'm really moving physical natural gas and the pipeline goes along the highway that I had to drive home and I passed the compressor station, I actually thought that's quite cool, right? Because software had a physical impact, right? And I knew what was going on there physically.
So you were like managing gas flows as you're managing now power flows?
Yes, actually, the start was really import in Baumgarten. That's a famous node in Austria where we import from Slovakia. So mainly Gazprom gas back then. So OMV, the Austrian oil and gas major, was I think the first ones to conclude a long-term contract with Gazprom. And that gas is then distributed to Germany, to Hungary, to Italy via various pipelines. And you have to book capacity there in different qualities, right? Also, that's a topic, meanwhile, in in power markets. So if you have firm or interruptible capacity, etc. And then really consider physics, right? Different heating values for natural gas, high-low heating values. Back then we had something called different gas days. So we had in the control area, so DSO power equivalent, we had 0 to 0 as a calendar day basically. On the transport we had 6 to 6, and for import we worked in 8 to 8 o'clock schedules, and we had to bring that all together while the colleagues in Germany worked on a calendar day in kilowatt hours, right? So no messing around with heating values and all that stuff. So, but actually gas has a quality, right, compared to power.
Mm-hmm. So that was a kind of the energy background, and you also had a bit of an entrepreneurial side of things. And there you could also highlight some of the milestones that led you to Enspired in your background, entrepreneurially speaking.
I mean, I always used to work in small, agile, innovative companies, right? Not because I've chosen them. I think they have rather chosen me as their employee. So from the first company with liberalizing the gas market to being a freelancer, helping the customer doing market entries across Europe, to doing consultancy for short-term power trading. So my whole career has been very driven by innovation in the software space and energy, and always luckily in roles where I could take a lot of decisions, take on a lot of responsibility, like in my previous role as managing director of Visotech, super small Austrian company back then, and scaled to across Europe within 2.5 years organically. So no investors behind, etc. So there were quite some rewards in the past, let's call it like this, for taking risks, right? So I think there was not a single time whenever when we did a bigger strategic move that it failed, right? So I'm knocking on wood now, but so far we had a very good gut feeling for bold moves. And I think that also gave us the confidence for Enspired, right? That first people who joined Enspired, we have worked together, we have seen that it works, what we're doing, everybody was clear about his or her role in the organization. So I would say it was the natural result of 20 years experience to do what we do now at Enspired.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And to what extent do you attribute your last experience with Viso to Enspired? What were the building blocks, so to say, that you are now also leveraging?
I think one topic that we all learned there is scalability. It's very easy to lose yourself in chasing exciting opportunities, right? A little project here, a little project there. But it just takes forever to scale a company. Another part of scalability, if you're organically growing, right, you're always in that mode of first signing a customer. Okay, now I have enough money to recruit 2 more people, and I have to sign the next projects, right? And you're in theory always lagging behind. And if you really want to be bold and see an upcoming opportunity and you want to invest upfront, then it's really hard to do in the organically way, unless you're already a huge corporate, right? And you have money on the side and you just invested. But if you're growing it from zero, bootstrapped organically, it's I think you will be too slow for some markets. When you think about AI advancements, when you think what's going on with battery storage, or how fast the energy industry has gone in general, right? I'm coming from a time where everything took years and nobody was in a hurry in the energy industry. There was not a discussion about energy transition. There was no volatility, no nothing, right? It was very stable, regulated business. And now I have the feeling it's exactly the opposite, right? Regulation cannot keep up. Incumbent players struggle a bit sometimes with speed. So there is a lot of learnings we have taken, and also things that we wanted to avoid in a sense. So we have also learned what's not that smart, right? For example, we have been or had been an Austrian company and everything in German, right? Internal documentation, emails, contracts, whatever, which is a problem if you scale geographically in sales, which is a problem if you onboard your first employee who doesn't speak German, right? So you either limit yourself and say, sorry, only German speakers allowed, and you miss out on a lot of great talent, or you do that fundamentally different. So that was something we did from day one. At Inspired, everything is English, all contracts are English. We rather had the struggle the other way around. The German customers asked for German contracts, and we were like, oh my God, we don't have them, right? Even as Austrian company. So there were things that have worked very well, like focus on scalability and what does it take. And there were other things that we just learned because it was very cumbersome in the past, right? How we set it up. So I think it's a good mix of different experiences.
Cool. Yeah, and talking software and languages and cultures and scaling, well, I'd be very curious also to hear your opinion. So as we are in this age of AI as well, and there's plenty of companies built in the US that are successful, also from the internet age, software companies, and we seem to struggle in Europe compared to the US and China and some other regions. Whereas you are a brilliant example of also a software company that is successful internationally and has been able to develop top-notch software out of Europe. What's your take on this, and what makes you optimistic that Europe can also turn things around, and what do you think do you attribute to this weakness of Europe, and how come there are not more Inspireds and Wieso and Jürgen Mayerhofers out there?
I think there are quite some, right? The problem that we have is we reach some kind of glass ceiling at some point in terms of scaling. So I think entrepreneurships in Europe is still not recognized as super valuable, right? We still live from the well-known brands that have been established decades ago and are now big companies. I think it's pretty good in Europe to get early stage funding, right, up to a certain stage. But you see, if you really want to scale business, very often investors from the US, Asia, etc., are involved. So I think we have the talent and we have the technology, but we're just not brave or bold enough, right, to really say. I mean, you could challenge me now and say, what did hold you back from raising 500 million euros and go all in, right? And it's not the vision, it's just the capital, right? Other companies burn billions of euros based on a vision, right? And typically these companies are sitting outside of Europe, right? And these are the admired ones. And I think that there is a financing issue, and the other is, I think, culturally, everything has been working well, right? The automotive industry, but nobody thinks back of. I mean, they also started small, and now they're established, and I think there is not enough support in terms of capital, sometimes even regulation, and sometimes just recognition of, I don't know, politicians, other industry, etc. So that's my take. I know that's a very high level one, but I think if somebody would say, hey, Jürgen, do you want to have 200 million to go totally crazy on a global level, we would know how to spend that money, right? Pretty sure.
Okay, so I'm looking forward. You already have raised your Series B. Obviously, you will probably not stay there, and we'll come back to that. And just one more point on before we move and deep dive into Inspired and what you do, to the point we just made. Is there, in your view, we talk a lot about decentralization of the energy world, but in my view, we don't talk enough about the software definition of the energy world that is changing. So we talk about in mobility, as we are in the intersection of mobility and energy. There's always concept of software-defined vehicle coming over and over. I feel in the energy world, we don't talk enough about the energy world also being transitioning towards the software-defined energy world. I'd love to have your take on that.
I mean, everything we do is software, right? Everything is automated, so no human intervention from the point in time an algorithm is live. So from automated retraining to optimizing the parameters to adapting to fundamental situations. I think, to be honest, it will be the only way, and because decentralized small assets are fundamentally different to dispatch to manage than our centralized large assets, right? I think incumbent players are extremely good at managing their large portfolios. But what we see is that we just lack, as an energy industry in general, we lack execution capabilities for decentralized setups, right? I mean, ranging from smart meter to, I wouldn't even call it software, right? That you need there, from smart meter rollout to behind the meter optimization. That's all super nascent, right? I have all this fancy setup at home, from PV to charger to battery storage to heat pump, whatever, and the solutions are just not where they are on slides in reality, unfortunately. So I think there is not enough focus on software and technology. It's still get this battery, buy it, install it, and you're done. And I think that leaves out quite some potential. And of course, you have the incumbent world that kind of holds us back a bit, right? Because you on political level see that, yeah, there is also different directions to be taken with conventional power plants, etc. So I think some stakeholders are stuck in the old world that they know since decades, which goes back to the previous question, right? If they would be bold on technology, there should be way more investments in AI, in energy tech companies and whatsoever. But I think they did not realize it yet, because the incumbents tell them, guys, everything is fine, build some gigawatts of whatever power plant type, right? And we will solve it the old way. Which is correct, right? It worked in the past. Why shouldn't it work now? But you just have to ignore the energy transition and all the other things. So
Right.
I think players will win that have good software capabilities.
Thanks. Now I'd like to do a funny maybe exercise. One of the most impressive things you have next to building Inspired is that you're also a father of 5 kids. And how do you explain Inspired to your kids? Like, if you have to explain it in a simple way, in a short way, what does a dad do, so to say?
So the easiest one is if we're in the car, right? And in Austria, we have quite some wind farms. I always tell them that we take the power out of that wind farm, store it, and deliver it whenever it's needed, right? So that the lights are on. That's the pitch for 4-year-olds, right? I've of course shown them our projects on pictures, right? 100 megawatts that we optimize, and then they are blown away that a battery could be that big, right? They still, they're kids. They think of these small little things for their toys. That's a battery in the world. But that's the easiest one, right? Having something tangible, because it's basically impossible to describe software platform, full automation that doesn't mean anything. But if you have a physical wind farm that you pass by with the car and you show them a picture of a battery and you say you just store it and release it later, they're most probably fine with it.
Nice one. I like it. And what do you do if you explain shortly to an energy expert, somebody who knows the industry well? How do you explain Inspired short?
Then I would typically explain that we're a commercial optimizer of battery storage, right? So we connect via the EMS with our platform, connect on the other side to all markets, which is wholesales and ancillary services. And with our fully automated setup, take care of all the forecasting and bidding decisions in between, with the goal to generate maximum revenue for the asset owner. That would be something like this-ish explanation.
Makes sense.
And typically there is still coming follow-up question. There are still
Yeah,
coming follow-up questions, right?
exactly. And that's a good segue to the follow-up questions. So in the value stream, so what was also the insight compared to other the conventional trading that was done before Enspired, so to say, and now in the era of Enspired? What would you say? How would you compare it?
I would say that I think the era before, also where I worked, right, I was involved in CCGTs and whatever. I think a focus was very much on the long term, on a very detailed modeling of the asset, right? You wouldn't know what you need to do for a spot optimization of a CCGT, what to consider, right? From ramps to temperatures to whatever. So I think the last decades were really focused on the technical details of the assets and day ahead optimization. And I think this is where we have seen our opportunity, because when we asked incumbent players, are you optimizing your do you optimize your flexibility? They were like, sure. But what they meant is they optimized it, bid it into the day ahead auction, and then they went for lunch, right? And that was flex optimization back then, and it's not wrong, right? It is actually flex optimization. But up to that point, you just needed to be very good in optimizing your asset, right? Get your dispatch out, get your shadow prices and all that stuff, your PFCs. You bid and you're done, right? And then you told the guys at the power plant, do this tomorrow, what had just been awarded in the day ahead auction. And the last mile is way more complex with intraday and real-time dispatch. So from both sides, right? For dispatching the power plant when it's not fully automated, right? There's still power plants where people are sitting there and pushing the levers more or less, right? So that's a change management topic, rather, to convince the people who have been just ramping it up once a day that they should now dispatch a quarter hourly schedule, right? Explain it to them after 3 decades of doing the same stuff, to the software capabilities that you need, right? I mean, there is some tools out there, but if you want to be really exceptional, a standard tool will just not give you an edge, right? Compared to all the others who buy the same standard tool. So I think that still makes it for quite some of the incumbent players really tricky. This change in mode of operation, that suddenly there is a lot of value in the last mile of flex optimization, and that you need software and technology for it, right? And automated processes. And so I think that's fundamentally different. And that's, this is where we jumped in and said, we see an opportunity where we can be better than incumbent players, because we don't have to compete in the other areas, right? They're doing this since decades. They know what they do.
So just maybe to not lose the listeners, or for the listeners' sake, we are talking about the fundamental problem that you're trying to solve, or that you solve, is that companies are not able to automatically also control any asset. That's one big, I would say, one big dimension, and the other is being able to react to more market signals and predict better how these market signals should interact with an asset, right? That said in a correct me if I'm wrong.
You could call it like this, right? Because the new signals that you mentioned is, for example, intraday price changes, right? More than 10 million updates per day in Germany, for example. Somebody has to listen to them, and it's for sure not a human. I mean, you can and give it a try, but that requires technology, right? To be very efficient with that. And I think that's just a paradigm shift in how you optimize flexible assets, especially flexible assets.
Yeah. And the opportunity also, maybe for just laying some groundwork, there are the spot markets that are composed of the day ahead and the intraday, and so you can prices usually are a result of the volatility of renewables, much more are influenced by the volatility of renewables much more, and the result of the offer and the demand at 15-minute slots. That's the one optimization that you do, and you're also, I think, participating in the balancing services markets, which are the transmission system operators, the grids that are trying to get
the capacity that flows through the different cables at all times stable at 50 hertz, right? And then within the TSOs, because I'm sure we will use these terminologies, there's different markets, and there's the very short term FCR, and then there's the a bit longer term AFR that are to be distinguished, right?
I would even argue that all markets that you have mentioned are kind of balancing markets in a sense, right? Because the big difference for wholesales, you trade it before delivery. So we can trade now for tonight and even for tomorrow already. All the 50-minute products, then 96 for tomorrow. And that's kind of part of, for example, if we stay with Germany, the market model that you're forced to trade out your renewable deltas, how we call it, so updates. So if you at a certain point in time closer to delivery see, oh my God, there is more PV or less PV or more wind than expected, you have to trade that, the difference. So that's kind of a pre-balancing. If you would skip that, like it was in the past, you would have to take the full delta between what you thought yesterday in the day-ahead auction and what is really happening into ancillary services. And ancillary service then happens during the 15 minutes delivery period. So the TSO says, this is happening, or the frequency is automated, but this is what I'm seeing with the grid. I need assets to help me, right? If there is less PV than expected, even half an hour ago, if there is a power plant outage. But I think the whole process that you described helps balancing the grid, right? In either before or during delivery in closer to real time.
And you engage in all of these?
Yes, sure. That was kind of the innovation for battery storages, right? If you look back 4 years from now, batteries were all in frequency containment reserve, the FCR you have mentioned, which is, let's call it pretty easy to manage because you have a frequency controller on site that measures on-site frequency. And if there is too much electricity in the grid, you charge and vice versa, right? So it's a rather passive service. There was no creative bidding strategy or whatsoever. And over the last 4 years, that transformed to a fully fledged algorithmic optimization problem, right? Trying to find the optimum of how and where to participate with your battery storage.
And very interesting. And are there limits to your solution geographically speaking? So all that we're talking about right now is the liberalized markets, I understand. Yeah. So any market that is still in the old world, so before 1997 in Europe, I'm not sure how it is exactly in the US or how the history of liberalized power markets were in all countries. But so what is it correct that you're limited by the countries that are not liberalized? Or?
Yeah, to be precise, so to limited to have the biggest added value of our software or our service actually, right? Because you also get route to market, etc. Not only, so we don't license the software, but just the full service. You would ideally have ancillary services or balancing markets organized by the TSOs, which is typically the case, plus a liquid wholesales market. Or also imbalance markets like in Netherlands or Denmark, etc. So several revenue streams. If you have a country where it's still FCR would be dominant, right? And there is no wholesale market, you can use our software, but it will not provide a huge uplift compared to what incumbents do, right? So that would be a red flag for us to enter that market, because we only go if we add more value. So Europe is well suited in general. We're also entering the Japanese market with a partner announcement to follow soon. US is differently organized via the ISOs and in 5 minutes granularity, but would work. Australia, same. But I would not argue for every country on this, for the more than 200 on this planet, right? So we need a certain infrastructure of a liberalized market, right? So pool for liquidity and different services. Otherwise, the optimization problem is not big enough, right? That it requires us.
But let's say, to take one example that I think is always under discussed in the Western world and is still shaping the energy transition as no other. How would Inspired be used in China, or could that be an option?
I think in theory, yes. Last time I talked with somebody like 3-4 weeks ago about it, and I think I'm not clear yet if spot markets are fully established and
Right.
accessible for third parties, etc. And that would be things that we just use, right? So it has to be liberalized and allows equal access also for third party players. But if that's the case, China would be one. I just haven't heard or talked to anybody who said, hey guys, China has everything you need, right? I think it's on its way. I've also been in contact, to have another example, with the Indian Power Exchange already before Inspired, right? Because they were establishing a spot market. So I think there are some countries emerging in that sense that they look which market models have been proven successful in other regions and just lean onto them, right? They don't copy them, but they say, okay, that works with these qualities. It makes sense, right? It's physical products, right? It's grid frequency. It's the same basically in every country, even if there is different, if you have 60 instead of 50 hertz, etc. But the fundamental concept is the same, right? So no limitations, let's say, then regulatory maturity or liberalization maturity is the limiting factor for us to go there.
And is your vision where the energy world is going? I mean, talking really world as the whole world, that we will have 100% renewables, so wind, solar, and batteries, and then have increasing liberalization and then optimizations like Inspired in the, let's say, next 40 years?
I hope that it will be faster, to be honest. But I think it's not only about renewables and batteries. Of course, that's an extremely good combination. But depending on the current generation stack, right? The initial goal has to be to decarbonize, right? So phasing out the most dirty ones first. I think there is still in some markets a role for natural gas, for example, as a solution before we go to a higher renewable penetration. Because what we've seen in some markets like Spain or in ERCOT, etc., is that grid infrastructure is maybe not fully ready yet for 100% renewable penetration. So we see first grid forming setups, etc. We see a lot of co-location discussions going on, but it's more discussions than really rollout. So I think we also have to give the grid some time to catch up with the speed of, for example, PV, etc., or battery rollout. But yes, in the end, I think it should work. We're also missing long duration storage. I'm a bit biased as Austrian, right? We have a lot of pumped hydro, so we don't have that big problem. But other countries don't have the opportunity to just build some pumped hydro, and it takes quite some time. But so I think the long duration storage is the missing piece to get to a 100% renewable world. But there is no incentive in most markets yet, and it's not commercially viable. So a lot of projects in the longer durations have been built out of security of supply mindset, I would say. So that's why a lot of them are state-owned or controlled by countries, right? So I think that there's missing something still to make it commercially attractive.
And what's your best guess, if you had to take a guess, what will be the long-term solution? So for the 1 to 2 day maybe volatility of renewables, I mean, every country is a bit different, but let's take continental Europe in particular as an example. Germany, where we're already at 60% renewables, really heading fast to 100. Will we have the need for hydrogen? Will we use just install even more batteries because they will be getting so cheap that it will actually be economical to have a 2-week battery back, or more interoperability. There's actually the Redefining Energy. Greetings go to the other podcast. They are trying to build a line between the Canada and Europe. So some interoperability between different countries, interconnectors. Yeah. What's your
I think there are some intercontinental plans, right, of cables, etc. But that's huge infrastructure projects. I don't know how fast. I'm not a very expert in terms of chemistry, right? I don't know how far you can push the duration, right? That would be the most cost efficient one. Maybe we get surprised by other technologies like flow batteries, right? That they're around for quite some time, but never found their sweet spot. There is biodegradable materials inside, etc. So they would even be more sustainable and than classical LFPs, etc. So maybe LFPs, not LFPs, sorry, long duration storage, LDS will be their sweet spot. There is a lot of experiments with compressed air, etc. So I think as soon as the markets are there for the so-called Dunkelflauten, maybe TSOs will procure long duration storage, etc. And then the commercial most competitive solution will just win, right? No matter if it's compressed air or flow or whatever it be, right? So I don't have a huge bet on a single technology. I'm just not a big fan of hydrogen to produce it from wind, lose efficiency, transport it, lose efficiency, regasify, lose efficiency, and burn it to lose again efficiency. So forgive me who was a hydrogen fan, but I'm just boiling it down to this store electricity via hydrogen. I'm not convinced about that case, especially as my background is natural gas and natural gas storage.
Right.
So I think there may be applications for hydrogen, but I don't think that this will be
it's
one
losing
commercially
in
competitive
mobility. At least it's very clear that it's already has lost the battle in commercial transportation and in any other transportation in mobility. And any it's not, I'm not sure if you're following that a lot, as you're using also AI at Inspired. Is I find the topic very interesting, the AI data centers build outs right now, and if that could become actually do you see it's a hurdle that we will not be able to deploy more data centers because of grid constraints, or how do you look at that topic, or also EVs, if there will be any capacity limitation?
I think it's a bit hyped, the topic, to be honest, from an energy industry perspective, because the consumption is not as huge as, I mean, sometimes you get the feeling when you read the media that 90% of global electricity will be consumed by data centers, right? I think it's not that big, right? It's rather single-digit percentages.
You're right, yeah.
And I think like big power plants, like large battery storages, they will find the grid access, right? I'm rather interested from the side of flexibility, because if you have batch jobs, etc., these things could be quite flexible.
Right.
But I think it's very, very early, right? Because data centers that run now are rather designed to be available and not be flexible. But new data centers may be designed for, if you have batch jobs, you could even assign marginal costs of based on electricity prices, based on when you run them, etc., or how long it takes to complete them. So I think there will be an exciting market. There is one trend that speaks a bit against what I'm just saying, is especially in the US, the collocation of generation assets, right? So what I just said only works if you integrate it with energy markets. If you kind of put a huge data center somewhere in the middle of nowhere, and then you put an SMR next to it,
yeah,
the grid support is not that big, right?
Right, a small modular reactor, nuclear reactor.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, and that's actually a topic I had. That's a good segue. Is, do you see major hurdles in the energy system as it's right now in terms of flexibility versus other goals that are being favored? So examples, in my view, are peak shaving, where we're trying to optimize for the optimal base load, and then that's something that reduces grid fees, but it doesn't really incentivize being able to react to other signals right now. So that's a good example, or the one you just gave as well. So are there these type of examples, and are you optimistic that we will be fast enough to change incentives for many assets to be able to participate more and be more flexible?
Yeah, so I can just share my experience working with grid operators, right? So there is security of supply, right? Paying, it's there, don't touch it. It's the highest good, right? The grid has to be available, and consumers have to get the electricity, etc. Then you have this topic of affordability. So the businesses are typically in most countries regulated, right? So they're not profit oriented. Or are not allowed to. So in most markets that I'm aware of, there is a cap on how much they are allowed to earn, and you have a mechanism for distributing their costs, right? So what they do has direct impact, typically also on end consumers via different mechanisms in different countries. So actually, TSOs have always been incentivized to keep the systems running, right? With a long-term horizon. Don't panic, don't experiment, just keep it running, right? And they did great. We have actually very working, in Europe. I think nobody can complain, right?
In other countries, it has to be said, because some listeners might not know, brownouts and blackouts and constant lack
load
of power
shedding,
supply,
yes.
is rather the norm.
Yeah. So I think when you say flexibility, I think you have to put it into this box of grid planning, grid investments, etc. Right? I see flexibility as an alternative of expanding or extending the grid. Right? Very often you have this one node, and then you have just 5 times a year in special situation with super high load, etc. That the grid faces constraints or comes close to its limits. Right? And I think flexibility could be a very charming way of, instead of extending this node, just put a battery there or whatsoever, right? There is some grid booster projects already, but typically regulation holds a lot of grid operators back from doing these infrastructure projects, because third-party access and non-discriminatory and all that stuff, right? Because it has never been designed for private investors going somewhere and building smart things. It was always under the control of utilities and TSOs. So I think flexibility is, or should be, part of the grid infrastructure plan. Simple as that, right? And there is different solutions, sometimes even cheaper ones. And I'm actually very happy that currently, I mean, now finally, we talk energy transition, right? We have coming from the battery space, right? We have private investors coming and wanting to build battery storage, right? A lot of it. The second component is first time non-subsidized, right? No incumbent players involved. A lot of people complain about, PV subsidized, wind subsidized, everything subsidized, nothing works. And now battery comes and it works without any subsidies, right? So then financing was a topic, but out of the more than the 1 gigawatt that we have under management, 900 whatever megawatts are merchant financed, right? So financing works. It's getting more difficult with scale, of course, and the market needs to learn. And now the last step that is missing is aligning it with different grid levels, right? And now we're finally talking of what's the impact of a battery storage on a certain location. Because you cannot just ignore where it sits, right? I think, to be honest, 2 years ago, I would have said, doesn't matter where you place a battery storage. But we also learned a lot that it does matter, right? If you're on a specific node, if there are several batteries on the same node, and what's missing is clear rules how to integrate that. You maybe realized it in media, there is this grid supportive, grid friendly, grid whatever, all these fancy words where nobody knows exactly what it means, but it all boils down to hey guys, I'm as a grid operator, you have to align with me, right? Because I know the grid and you want to place an asset there. And we have to communicate of what helps me and what makes my problem maybe even worse, right? If you have these
Right.
5 occasions in a year with high load and the battery does the wrong thing in these 5 occasions, grid operators won't be happy, right? Even if 99% of the time you do it right. And there are studies that this is somehow happening exactly like this, that the battery naturally does the right thing out of price formation and how it works in most markets. And there may be some occasions where you want to limit its activity or align it with the interest of the grid, right? And so I think we're finally there to have all stakeholders on the table and say, if I place a battery there and I've talked to all the players, we can build a subsidy-free thing that pushes higher renewables penetration and the grid operator is happy, right? So I think we're in a very special time, right? Maybe we look back in 2 years and say 2025, 26 were the years where we figured out how this whole decentralized stuff works, right?
Right.
So
that's actually one of the maybe the most interesting conundrums that where society is still not so aware. Indeed, that there's this discrepancy, right, between what the grid is able to do and then what the volatility of renewables in terms of production is able to do. And that's the two dimensions that one needs to think about, and then the battery somehow play in between those two as well. And that's why placing this battery at good points is key, as you just said. And one thing, I mean, on the optimistic side, that of course I'm a possibilist as a person, so I think there's nothing that that is, if you want to do it, we will be able to do it. But yeah, of course there are plenty of hurdles in between. But it's possible from a physics standpoint. We can design the grids incentives in such a way that the two will work in sync the best way forward. I mean, that it should be possible from a mathematical, just thinking from the physics, right? Now, in terms of practical matters, we're already seeing in countries where DSOs, where there's so many DSOs, like in Germany, Switzerland, that these DSOs seem to have difficulties as well to keep up with this change, and especially adapting the pricing to real-time pricing, which I think would be a eventually required measure. And then having optimizers like yourselves, which would be an interesting segue as well, having the optimization not only at a TSO level and a spot level, but also at a DSO level, prioritizing, of course, the DSO as a hard constraint, probably. What's your view on this?
yeah, I think what you described is the result of centralized system design, right? Because where have 1 gigawatt coal blocks been connected in the past? Where have 860 megawatt CCGTs been connected, right? Where have pump storages been connected? For sure not in the distribution grid, most of the, I mean, at this size. So the control, and that's now my interpretation, right, of the past, right? I've not been involved in writing the regulations, but the control was in the hand of the TSOs, right, of high voltage, because this is where the large volumes are connected, and so I think there is a missing link to lower grid levels. And lower grid levels have never been asked the DSOs to do close to real-time monitoring of grid congestions, of very accurate forecasting, etc. So when we engage with them, sometimes the data is not there, or they work with a lag of X minutes, right, where it's basically too late. Then the call is executed by the TSO, maybe not considering the DSOs below, right, because below 1 TSO, there is a ton of DSOs, right? And it makes a difference if you're in the north of Germany or in the south or in the east, or if you're close to a large power plant or not, or next to a large consumer. So I think we've missed a bit this integration. We just stopped at the highest level and say there is commercial signals. The TSOs know everything, and they make the call, right? And now we realize with smaller assets on DSO level, maybe this should have been set up differently, right? And that we need more data to make informed decisions and not only on the TSO level. So I think that's an energy market design issue that we have to solve. Otherwise, we will struggle and not find the best solution, right? The alternative is we just allow decentralized assets only in specific points, right? Or they will be limited randomly on different points if we don't find an harmonious way of data exchange and rules also among all DSOs. So I think, but that's again the same topic. I think now we're talking energy in transition, right? Across all technical levels. Technically, I'm with you. No problem at all. That's all data is there. It's just different way of working.
Yeah, no, definitely. And then are you involved at all in policy shaping and making? And are there still any policy changes that you see that are in the horizon that make you optimistic related to this topic?
So actually, I myself not. I mean, we deliver position papers on topics. So from an optimizer's perspective, on topics that touch our business model or that touch our customers. Or I'm sitting in the EPEX Exchange Council, right? Raising the hand for.
Yeah, this.
EPEX, the biggest power exchange in Europe, has a council built of members. So all members of EPEX have to vote who's participating there. And this council acts like a sounding board, right? Or gives guidance on new products, or has to vote if new products will be introduced at EPEX or not. So it's the voice of all members, basically. So, and of course, our part there is to represent fully automated companies, right? Because we have different needs than the top 4 in Germany, right? With huge generation fleets, etc. So it's a very diverse setup in that sense, from players with strong renewable focus, players with strong conventional focus, we with a ton of batteries. So we try to provide input at different forums, but we're not like active involved in policy shaping more than others, right? It's not our business. We provide advice out of our operational experience.
Makes sense, yeah. And you talked about these, you represent the fully automated players, and within these players, I think one of the key messages you're pushing, which you rightfully so, is transparency and how to guarantee indeed that the promises you make to your customers are right. Maybe can you elaborate how do you? I think you announced this auditing with the KPMG, and are there? Yeah. Can you maybe elaborate on that and how you think it will also evolve the market to make the whole promise transparent?
Yeah, so on the one hand side, you have to consider that battery storage optimization is a pretty new discipline, right? We came up with cross-market optimization. We presented it to the public, I think, 2022. So we signed our first battery storage 21. So it's pretty new, like 3.5 years old. And at some point in time, customers got confused by bankable forecasts being not aligned with daily optimization results, etc. And what you want to have is some kind of investment security, right? That has a lot of aspects, but one component is, of course, do I have a sane forecast for the next 10 to 15 years, right? To build my business case. So we started actually very early to share some of our data with players, right? But we found out that others without operational assets, right? And that's not good or bad now, but they showed up with super high simulations and say, wow, guys, we can do 300, I don't know what, 1,000 euros per megawatt per year, etc. And on the other hand side, you have also very unexperienced asset owners, right? Because they maybe built their first battery, or quite a lot of them are actually building their first or second battery, right? And so you have not a lot of experience on both sides of the table, right? And that resulted in higher and higher forecasts. And we said, guys, it's kind of totally stupid. We know that it's not true because we have batteries live. We have 1 hour, we have 2 hours, we have close to 4 hours. We have Netherlands, we have Belgium, we have Austria, we have Germany, right? So we have that operational experience. And so we said, the only way is to help maturing the market is making this stuff public, right? But in a way that we don't expose single asset performance, right? That's data of our clients. So to fulfill that quality criteria, we went with KPMG, an auditor, right? They have to stick to all the nitty-gritty rules. Trust me, that's not fun. It took us like 8 or 9 months to go through it. So we have to provide the data. They ask you questions and say, hey, is this representing the market, or are you suggesting just how to avoid that you not only take the good performing assets and skip out? So we have to show them our contracts and the whole asset base. And so audit, top 4 audit guidelines behind that. And so we published it since January this year. We will publish our 2-hour storage index. I mean, I showed it at Get Inspired in Berlin. We've also shared the 2-hour performance, which we're currently certifying with KPMG.
Can you just elaborate on this hourly performance? Because I'm not aware, and
Yes.
listeners might also not be. So,
Okay.
What do you mean with that? Yeah.
So in the old world, 3 years or 2 years ago, and even longer, you had battery storages designed to deliver frequency services, so mainly FCR. And to do that, you had to have 1 hour of storage duration. So 10 megawatts of power, 10 megawatt hours of capacity, right? How long does it take to charge your battery from 0 to 100% is an hour. That's and the same for discharging. And that was the most cost efficient dimensioning CapEx wise, so investment wise, to deliver frequency containment reserve. That's why in the past, all battery storages were 1 hour. Even longer ago, half an hour was okay. So 10 megawatt, 5 megawatt hours. So it took you just half an hour to fully charge or discharge the battery. We meanwhile see in all markets no shorter duration than 2 hours. So 10 megawatt, 20 megawatt hours. So it takes you 2 hours to fully charge or discharge the battery storage. And that, of course, comes with different revenue potential. So a 2-hour storage, it's first of all, it's newer technology. The old ones we had were NMC, the new ones were LFPs, or lithium iron phosphate, and have more cycles, etc. So these are fundamentally different configurations. Let's call it like this. So we agreed with KPMG to have around 1 hour storages as the old world, and cluster them into 1 hour storages, so 0.9 to 1.5. And from 1.5 hours duration to 3.5, we have the second cluster, which represents the assets currently in construction. And if we ever go to above 3.5 hours storage, we will add another cluster for longer durations, right? So in that sense, otherwise you cannot compare the performance, right? So if you build a 2-hour storage or that is in construction, you look at our 2-hour performance for comparable assets. If you have an old 1 hour, you look at the other. If you have longer duration, you look at the upper end of our 2-hour index. So it's very important to be fair and transparent in comparison, in comparing assets. So that was the idea, so that whoever has a battery storage, no matter if it's optimized by us, by somebody else, not optimized at all, in construction, whatever, you go to our website, you check the numbers, you can download the KPMG report. There is written the minimum performance, so the worst performing asset, the best performing asset, and the volume weighted portfolio performance. So also that you don't have not one small, exceptionally good performing one that drags around your performance. So, but that's all described in the documents and available for public download. And we already see that this gives a lot of confidence to asset owners, right? They look at the old forecasts, the bankable forecasts, they look at the real performance and say, okay, it has been slightly above. Then they ask and say, oh, I understand why a forecast has to be slightly lower, because there is stuff like volatility that cannot be forecasted accurately. So it really helps educating the market, and it's basically, I would argue impossible, meanwhile, in Germany to come up with a totally stupid backtest number, right? Because a client will go on our website and say, I made 300K, I don't know, in May annualized, and you say you can do 800. Now tell me how this works, right? But other markets are at this level, right? I've been in Poland recently, in Warsaw. Same story again. No operational track record, and it's about show me the high numbers. Yes, but I think there is fair because there is no operational data, there is no asset in cross market. But we recommend to look into other countries, right? If you don't find your dream car or the price of your dream car in Austria, you look what the Audi or whatever you like costs in Germany, right? Or what a similar car costs. So I think you get the story, right? It's operational data is just way more valuable than just simulation stuff.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, we're at the inception stages, as you said. Like, do you know on top of your head, like, what's the deployed battery storage capacity right now in key markets, or in Europe or in Germany? Or
I would have to lie. I haven't looked up the numbers for quite some weeks, but it's I think it was like 2-ish gigawatts of grid scale in Germany. But I always mess it up with there is so much residential in Germany,
right?
Yeah.
You do not do any residential. You always do more stationary and co-located, right? That's the and then businesses as well.
We have a VPP with a partner where we will have end of the year several thousand small batteries aggregated, but our core focus is grid scale. So larger batteries, single-digit megawatts up to 3-digit. So that's the sweet spot at the moment. But we also have CNI scale battery storages live since 2-3 years. So technology-wise, not a problem.
And will there be how much? Like there was, I think, 200 gigawatts in the pipeline in Germany alone.
500, meanwhile, 500. 500.
All right. So how much do you think will actually be built, and what's and how fast?
So we shared it very transparently. We have some really good developer customers, right? And we assume out of what the really smart people make out of the pipelines that it will be a single-digit percentage, right? Rather a small one, because you have to think if a good player who knows the business and has done 15 years of PV before, etc., knows the grid operators and how the game works with getting grid access, has a medium single-digit percentage, then you have some cowboys out there, some not Germans, right? So funds outside of Germany who give it a shot. So I think we will land, I don't know, at 10 gigawatts ish out of the 500. It's just I had a chat with this hopefully soon to be customer, right? And they have not a 15 years PV background, and the only way to do it for them is send grid applications, right? It's like that's just the only way. It's like sales, right? If you would talk traditional, I don't know, software sales, whatever, everybody knows you have to fill your pipeline. You will have a hit rate at every stages, and then at the end there is 30% ish, depending of where you start to track, right? And that's the same. I think grid operators have just not designed it for this, right? With the first come, first serve, etc. Because who built larger assets in the past? Incumbents. And even 2 decades before, they have been one company before they have been unbundled. So I think, again, a result of system design in my world. Nothing bad with it. No bad intentions on both sides. But not properly designed a system to handle all those grid requests.
Makes sense, yeah. And let's talk Enspired. You have achieved already quite some milestones. I think the Series B was a bit back, and then you can share some numbers so that the listeners also get a size where you are and what's your plan. Where do you want to be in a few years' time? can share.
Yeah, unfortunately, our plane changes. So our North Star not, right, of being a global battery optimizer. But, when we raised our Series B, 25.5 million euros 1.5 years ago. And the idea was like to have some countries in Europe, get Europe break even basically, and as a stronghold or as a foundation, and then scale globally. And then suddenly we work with a mind-blowing partner, Optimus Energy in Greece on 270 megawatts. We work with an extremely good partner in Spain, Portugal, Nexus Energia. We work with Ecovoltis, super matching DNA in Poland, etc. So Europe goes crazy in terms of battery storage, right? And so we always move back. So even countries, right? We get requests from Romania, you cannot imagine. I've spent quite some time in Bucharest in my past. But no, yeah. Cefaci. So the thing is, you have these maturing markets, right? And where UK was actually by far first in Europe, right? On the continent, you have it like stacked now, right? Based on market maturities. And whenever we say, okay, in 1.5 years, we start looking now more into the US in 1.5 years, it's like, here's another country in Europe, here's another country, right? And so Europe keeps us quite busy. So Greece, for example, was not on our roadmap. Now it is, and we have, biggest asset there is 150 megawatts, 300 megawatt hours, so quite sizable. So Europe keeps us busy. The goal is global, right? We do the first step with a Japanese partner, one of our shareholders, which will be announced soon. So if we have access to the Japanese power exchange, we're building the first forecasts, etc. So Japan will be our first global market. But yes, for the US, we have to first take care about our home continent, let's call it like this, before we do a bigger step.
Makes sense. And how do you ensure that scaling also geographically is quite far away? You maintain the product quality and the customer support required?
So actually, that was from the beginning. So I would say we're finally where we wanted to be, right? 5.5 years ago when founding the company. So as all of us have a tech software background. So the idea was to scale with technology instead of people, right? And what we've achieved, meanwhile, I had a chat some days ago with Wolfgang, my co-founder and CTO. And we improved some bidding for the optimization, and suddenly the bidding improvement has impact in Germany, in Austria, in Belgium, in Netherlands, in France. And so we achieve also this leverage, right, platform-wise. So it's strategically, one thing is risk diversification, revenue diversification, right, entering new countries. But the other is really leveraging that markets, especially on the continent, skip GB, please, for now, but on the continent are harmonized, right?
No, why GB? Why do you skip GB? Or like just out of...
Because they never wanted to be harmonized with the rest of Europe, right? So the market works fundamentally different. You have not a single shared order book, so you have EPEX and Nord Pools with different liquidity. You have auctions organized by two NEMOs, so the two power exchanges. You have different ancillary services, so what the TSOs request from you, different from the continent, some similar, some not at all. So connected via interconnectors, explicit capacity auctions instead of implicit, what we have with STEC and SIDC on the continent. So they just did not participate in more than a decade of harmonization, right? So that's in terms of scaling and geographical expansion, they are different. And I think that's also the reason why you rarely see UK players on the continent, and they rather say, look at Australia and the US. But some do, like Octopus or Kraken, right? But it's a bigger jump than you would assume in the first step. So, but other than that, we scale with technology, and that's some markets are easier and some are more complex, but typically it takes us some months to build something rock solid for a new country. which is mind-blowing. And that was the plan.
Yeah, congrats. And switching gears to fleets and smart charging, this podcast is also about that topic. I'd be curious, and also I wanted to say thank you as well for your help so far as advisor of Ridergy, and been super helpful. What's your view on fleets, electrification, smart charging, especially how it fits with Enspired, and is it if you have any thoughts related to the potential that is there for also bidirectional charging and these type of topics.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a passionate EV driver since nearly 10 years. So actually at Enspired, a lot of people don't know that we had a first smart charging solution with an Austrian utility like 4 years ago or so. I think it was 21 in live operation.
Nice.
So back then, players were not even sure if smart charging and load management is the same or not. So, but what most players meant with load management was like cut off the peaks, right? Peak shaving.
Right.
And what we meant with smart charging was power price optimized charging of a vehicle.
Right.
So that didn't scale back then. I think not enough volatility, not enough awareness, no spot price index tariffs, not enough charging infrastructure to be honest, right? There were not too many CPOs for charge point operators back then, etc. So I think we have been a bit early, and don't get me wrong now, but algorithmically piece of cake compared to a battery, right? Smart charging.
Right.
So that will change with vehicle to grid, of course, etc. But purely charging is, I mean, you get it basically for free now with your spot priced in tariff. So that's the background. So you can assume that I'm a firm believer in electric vehicles, right? So I think the biggest problem in scaling so far, or why we are not further progressed, is that the mobility industry underestimated the energy industry, right? Of who owns the metering point, what's the say of the supplier of that metering point, how does it work with balancing, how do you influence the forecast? So I think we've seen a lot of players who have thought that, just connect somewhere and then it's done, right? And then it's like, if you have like 10 charge points, sorry guys, then my supply thing is different. And then, it's 1 meter. That doesn't work to have 2 different tariffs on the same meter and all that stuff, right? What I've heard and learned over the last years. So I think the biggest potential from my point of view at the moment is commercial or corporate fleets or whatever, right? Where you have control over the vehicles. Because if you have residential players, maybe they're not so happy if you mess around with their 80,000 euros battery, right? But if it's company cars or transporters or whatever, or electric buses, they're typically owned, operated, or leased or whatever by the company. So I think you also get to some volume that's interesting. So I think that should be a thing. It's also easier to forecast the fleet than single assets, right? And out of portfolio thing. And I think you can get realistically to vehicle to grid at some point in time, because who on earth at home would buy a 2,500-3,000 euros charger, right, for vehicle to grid? So I think residential wise we're not there yet, but fleet wise I think there is a lot of players with large fleets already. And from Enspired's point of view, as soon as it's vehicle to grid, it's getting interesting, because we don't care if it's 64 containers standing still at a site, or if it's 200 cars that can be connected and disconnected, right? Optimization wise, it's very similar. Not the same, but similar.
And will there be a conflict in your view once we get to bidirectional in terms of number of batteries that will be deployed? There will be a competition between stationary batteries and the mobile batteries. Will there be like a cannibalization effect?
For sure on the energy side, right? But to be honest, I cannot judge yet if the cars are connected at the right point in time, right? If they will all be connected during noon, where it makes sense energy-wise, then you have very often longer durations, right? So it also depends on how fast the chargers are and what the cars are capable of charging, discharging, and what the OEMs accept, right? Just if you have 400 kilowatt DC charger, I don't know if they would be happy if you suck the battery empty in some minutes of an electric vehicle and then charge it again in another 10 minutes. So I think a lot of it depends on really the available flexibility in terms of power and megawatt hours or gigawatt hours or whatever. But yes, they should play the same game and will face the same topics, right? At some point in time, a DSO will come up and say, guys, sorry, on this node, you will not charge 3 megawatts and you will not discharge 3 megawatts at this point in time, right? So I think should be fully integrated and hopefully they profit from learnings from the grid scale rollout. So I have no doubts that this will work. It's just a matter of time.
Sounds good. Yeah. On this hopeful note, I'd like to ask you if you have some final messages as well for the listeners, and also how people can engage with you best.
With me as a person or with Enspired?
Both.
Engaging with us is easy, right? As soon as you're involved in the battery space, you will sooner or later cross us as some events, etc. You can always drop us a line. The fastest way to reach me is WhatsApp, right? That's how my wife reaches me, so I have to check if I get the message, right.
The kid is
LinkedIn,
still there.
LinkedIn is tricky, right? I get a ton of spam, and I just realized that I didn't answer things from 3 months ago, or even longer, which was a bit embarrassing for me. But I think you will figure out how to reach out to me or my colleagues. Or you reach out to Claudio and he drops me a WhatsApp.
Yeah, happy to make an introduction.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Yeah, and you have an I don't know, an inspiring last message as well to share?
I can just say if you're not active yet in the energy industry, this is the most exciting time, I think, since decades. And it's a unique opportunity no matter in what role, right? If you're talking about electric mobility, if you talk about battery storage, supply, whatever it is, right? I think this is really the time where we have a paradigm shift in energy, right? So I think if you have a chance to get involved with energy, the time is now, and I hope we will all be very proud in a decade or two to tell how much work we put into the new energy system 20 years ago. So that's why I love my job, right? Energy gets never boring, and now it's extremely exciting, unbelievable.
Definitely agree with you. Thank you, Jürgen, for your time and your energy. Keep it up, and have a good rest of the evening.
Thanks, you too.
Ciao.
This was Jürgen from Enspired. This conversation showed that batteries are not just pieces of hardware, they are market participants. The crucial advantage comes from fast automation that moves from measurement to forecast, from forecast to bid, and from bid to dispatch. Performance can be judged with simple, concrete metrics: the capture rate compared to day-ahead prices, the time it takes to place a trade, and the cost of forecast errors. Value is never the same everywhere. It follows local congestion, imbalance volatility, and country-specific rules. Merchant battery projects can work when a proper risk book is in place, including cap and floor structures, mixed revenue streams, and early pre-qualification for ancillary services. Success in the fields depends on integration details, solid EMS contracts, defined fallback states, good test plans, and reliable telemetry. Clean data and clear audit trails build trust with lenders and with regulators. Co-locating storage with wind or solar can add options, but grid limits and curtailment can remove those gains just as quickly. A practical next step is to automate end-to-end in a single market zone and scale only after the same KPIs hold up outside of backtests. What comes next is more flexibility at the distribution level, faster settlement cycles, and tighter performance guarantees. It was a very complex episode and shows the level of sophistication that Jürgen and Enspired bring to the market and to the table. I'm very excited to have him advising us at Ridergy and keeping on collaborating and hopefully scale as well together solutions like Enspired to fleets. And thanks for listening to Smart Charge, and see you in the next episode. Stay charged.